FBI and DOJ raid. Ex-police chief's home as corruption probe expands. FBI raid. Part 1. January 2024, New York City. Before sunrise, a convoy of unmarked SUVs rolled into a quiet neighborhood. Seconds later, FBI agents stepped out carrying federal search warrants. Their destination wasn't a gang hideout. It wasn't a cartel safe house. It was the home of a former police chief. The man who had once enforced the law was now at the center of a growing federal corruption investigation. Neighbors watched in silence as agents entered the property. No sirens, no dramatic chase, just a carefully planned operation that investigators had been building for months. According to public reporting, the FBI and federal prosecutors were examining allegations involving influence, business relationships, and possible corruption connected to several high-profile individuals. The search was part of a broader investigation, and at that stage, authorities had not announced criminal charges against everyone whose property was searched. But investigators believed the evidence inside could help answer much bigger questions. Questions that reached beyond one home, beyond one official, and possibly into a much larger. As investigators examined the evidence collected during the searches, one thing became clear. This case wasn't about a single meeting or one questionable decision. According to public reporting, federal investigators were trying to understand whether a network of relationships had been used to gain influence, exchange favors, or benefit from official positions. Every phone, every email, every financial record. It all became part of a much larger timeline. Federal corruption investigations are built one document at a time. Investigators don't rely on rumors. They compare bank records with travel records, phone calls with meeting schedules, text messages with financial transactions. Only when those pieces begin matching does the bigger picture start to emerge. In this investigation, agents reportedly seized electronic devices believed to contain valuable evidence. Today, a smartphone can reveal years of communication. Deleted messages, location history, photographs, contact lists, payment records, even conversations that people believed had disappeared forever. For forensic specialists, every device tells a story. But the devices alone weren't enough. Investigators also interviewed witnesses and reviewed business records connected to individuals already under scrutiny. Each interview helped verify timelines. Each document either confirmed or challenged existing evidence. That careful process is what separates federal investigations from speculation. Every allegation must be supported. Every claim must be backed by evidence, because once charges are filed, every piece of evidence will be examined inside a courtroom. As news of the investigation spread, public attention intensified. Questions quickly followed. How many people were involved? Were more searches coming? Would anyone face criminal charges? Federal authorities weren't providing many answers. That's typical during an active investigation. The FBI rarely discusses ongoing cases in detail. Instead, investigators allow court filings and public records to speak when the time is right. Behind the scenes, however, the investigation continued expanding. According to public reporting, investigators reviewed relationships involving former law enforcement officials, political advisors, and business associates connected through years of professional and personal contacts. What looked ordinary on the surface often required months of analysis. A business payment, a consulting contract, a private meeting. Individually, none of these necessarily prove wrongdoing. But together, investigators try to determine whether they form a pattern. That's why public corruption cases often take years to investigate. Every fact must fit. Every timeline must make sense. One missing detail can change the direction of an entire case. One overlooked message can connect people who previously appeared unrelated. For investigators, patience is often their greatest advantage. While headlines focused on the FBI searches, forensic teams continued reviewing thousands of digital files. Financial analysts examined records. Agents compared witness statements. Prosecutors evaluated whether the available evidence met the legal standards required for future court proceedings. The investigation was no longer limited to one address. It had become much broader. And according to public reporting, investigators continued following every lead wherever it pointed. For the public, the morning raid, was the biggest headline. For federal investigators, it was simply another step in a much longer investigation. The real question wasn't why the FBI searched the home. The real question was what the evidence would ultimately reveal. Because if investigators could establish a larger pattern, the case might extend far beyond one former official. And that's exactly where the investigation appeared to be heading. We're only halfway through this story. If you enjoy detailed breakdowns of real FBI investigations and major federal cases, subscribe to Criminal Nexus and turn on notifications. We cover the facts, follow the evidence, and explain how these investigations unfold. The final part. By the time federal agents completed their searches, the investigation had entered a new phase. The spotlight was no longer on the raid itself. It was on the evidence. Every phone seized, every document collected, every financial record. Investigators now had the difficult task of determining what those materials actually proved. In federal corruption cases, a search warrant is only one step. Prosecutors must decide whether the evidence supports criminal charges. That decision can take weeks, sometimes months. In more complex investigations, it can take even longer. Federal prosecutors don't simply ask whether something looks suspicious. They ask whether the evidence can prove a crime beyond a reasonable doubt. That is a much higher standard. Every document must be authenticated. Every witness must be credible. Every financial transaction must be explained. If even one critical piece falls apart, an entire case can become much harder to prosecute. That's why the FBI spends so much time building these investigations before making any public move. While investigators continued reviewing evidence, the public kept asking the same question. How could someone who once held one of the highest positions in law enforcement become the subject of a federal corruption investigation? For many Americans, that's the most difficult part to understand. Police leaders are trusted with enormous responsibility. They oversee investigations, protect communities, and enforce the law without favoritism. When allegations of corruption reach someone in that position, the damage extends beyond one individual. It affects public confidence in the institutions themselves. That's exactly why public corruption remains one of the FBI's highest investigative priorities. The goal isn't simply to prosecute crimes. It's to protect the integrity of public office. Because once public trust is lost, rebuilding it becomes far more difficult. This investigation also highlights how modern federal cases are built. Not through dramatic interrogations, not through anonymous tips alone, but through digital evidence, financial records, witness testimony, and months of careful analysis. The television version of an FBI investigation often lasts an hour. The real version can last years. Every lead must be verified, every claim must be tested, every fact must stand up in court. Whether this investigation ultimately results in additional charges or not, the message is clear. No public office places someone above the law, no badge, no title, no position of authority. Federal investigators follow the evidence wherever it leads, and when they believe evidence needs to be preserved, they seek the approval of a federal judge before executing a search warrant. That's exactly how the justice system is designed to work. For the community, the morning raid will likely remain one of the most memorable moments of the investigation. But for prosecutors, it represents only one chapter. The courtroom, not the headlines, is where the final outcome will ultimately be decided. Until then, investigators will continue reviewing evidence, interviewing witnesses, and following every lead. Because in federal investigations, the smallest detail can change everything. One email, one payment, one conversation. Sometimes, that's all it takes to uncover the truth. Thank you for watching Criminal Nexus.